right. Welcome back. I've got Steve Valentor with me. I'm going to do a little bit of a poor man's introduction, Steve, and then I'll let you tell a little bit about your background and your experience. So, Steve has 30 years of experience within the technology industry. He started as an entry-level engineer, kind of meandered through a number of roles, including the CEO and also the board chair at organizations. Currently, his entrepreneurial endeavor is Polynomial Ventures, which is actually a Chicago-based venture capital firm. He also is a teacher of entrepreneurship at DePaul, so he has a very unique perspective on entrepreneurship from an academic perspective and also as one himself. So I'm really excited to talk to you. Steve, how's it going?
Well, Boyega, thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
Awesome. So I like to get things started with a fun question. What did you want to be when you were growing up? What was your dream as a kid?
Well, I always kind of thought big. So the normal stuff for me, jet pilot, rock star, NFL player, NBA player, lawyer, brain surgeon, aircraft carrier captain, that sort of thing. Uh, but by the time I finished high school, I'd narrowed that down a bit to just, rocket scientist or business leader. And little did I realize, that eventually I would find my way to be CEO of an aerospace computer company. So a little bit of rocket science, a little bit of business as well. So it has been just a fantastic journey.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I'm curious, like what's got you, what motivated you to start a business or become an entrepreneur? Like, where did you get that passion? Because it is a bit of a crazy endeavor.
Yeah, well, I've always found that following the most interesting energy is, you look around in the world and you see what's around you and what is interesting and what are people putting energy into and what is generating enthusiasm. And my father was in the car business, and seeing the power that back in the 60s, that people having the ability to move themselves quickly and efficiently, with near complete freedom, that was just awesome and awe-inspiring to me. And I've always been passionate about that industry, but I realized also that newspapers and television were great at informing people, but you need a place to live. So housing and commercial real estate, a place to work, these are also important. And agriculture, food, we need to eat, and so every bit, and education makes people smarter. Aerospace moves people even faster and further, and shipping delivers goods and services. Every business is just so interesting, and eventually, I had this feeling that I really didn't know when I started working in technology that computers would lead me to semiconductors to aerospace computers, but I did know that business was interesting. It's always going to be there, and then at some point it occurred to me, you don't need to limit. You can actually buy pieces of all of these businesses, and that's a thing. They call it venture capital.
That's really interesting because I never had thought about venture capital as a, a kind of a la carte. I like these things and I want to pull them together. That's actually really now I want to be a venture capital when I grow up.
Yeah, well, the
So
oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that venture capital is it's a very, very broad, extremely broad industry, and most firms specialize in some type of at least initially they specialize in some type of technology. Like in my case, early stage tech, and this is what I've known for my whole career. I've been working in early stage tech, but the bigger, larger firms. I mean, you look at them, and they're in not just tech. I mean, they can be in everything, and in even you think of traditional industries. This is really one of the fascinating things is a lot of entrepreneurs are not the latest tech startup. they are, I have a friend who is I would call him an entrepreneur, and what he does is he's a kind of a one man uh, a headhunter. He does career placement. He does specific searches, and he puts it, and that industry, is pretty mature. The opportunity for innovation, they're just very, very small. He uses maybe more efficient tools than some of the firms do. He has lower overhead. That's his differentiation. But every business um, is every business area is ripe for entry by new, ambitious, creative people that want to make a difference and change the world.
Yeah. I really like that perspective because I think you're right. There's a lot of times you have people have these ideas and they're like, oh, I have this business idea. Oh, someone else is doing it. I can't do it. And a lot of times you tell them, it's like, no. There's a ton of space. There's space for everyone. If you think you have a unique, differentiating way of approaching this problem, go for it. I love the example of there are tons of different water companies. You can buy water from anybody, and that is a product that can't be that different. And so that is a really good perspective. Is if you have a unique way to approach the problem, go for it.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, Boy. There's the world has enough chairs. There's enough chair designs, but there are creative chair designers who are making new and better, more interesting chairs. I mean, every so often they come up with some ideas that don't last, but the bouncy ball chairs are the ones that you kneel on to make your back better, which actually make it worse. Uh, so the and I was thinking the other day about furniture stores. We've had so many furniture
Hmm.
stores over that. When I was in high school, I worked at a furniture store for a while, and I thought that was pretty interesting. People need furniture to sit on. What is the impact on the quality of somebody's life, how they feel about the furniture in their living room? When you come home from work and you sit down,
Hmm.
if you feel good about where you are, and you need to change from time to time, and sometimes I guess you have antique furniture, but it does wear out and it needs to be reupholstered. And it's hard to imagine what the innovations are going to be in the reupholstery industry, but there are entrepreneurs that are starting these type of businesses every day. So there's no limitations in terms of what businesses are great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to I ask every guest this question, and I'm curious to take a kind of secondary question or an addition to it. Um, in your first venture, what was your first action? And throughout the years, as you've interacted with different entrepreneurial ventures, and especially as a VC, have you seen different first actions over the years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the first startup I was involved in was in the late '80s. We were going to build a laptop before they really existed. Laptops were their portable computers were the size of a portable sewing machine. It was a big giant box. Compaq made these, and and to get down to 6 pounds, you had to give up something that you could put in a briefcase and actually carry around. You had to give up all kinds of features and functions, and they were very, very expensive. So we decided, a former coworker of mine and I from Zenith, we decided to leave and start our own company to do this. And we had some interesting differentiations, but the day that we found an investor, and he agreed to fund us initially, and then he would help us look for more money. And he owned real estate, and he had a building in downtown Chicago that he said, well, you guys can set up in there. And we walked in, and it was just an empty space. There was nothing but walls and a
Hmm.
floor, and there was no desks, there was no phones, there was no, this was before the internet, so there was no phone lines, there was no way to connect anything, and there was no furniture. And so we stood there and looked at each other and said, well, it's our first day at work. What are we going to do? We had to go out and buy some furniture. We had to get some phones. Uh, and so our first action was, I guess there was a prior first action in that we had to go out and find an investor. We had to come up with a concept. We had to write a business plan. We had to communicate that. But when we actually started, the first day we showed up, we needed to have a place to sit and write. You don't think of that when you work for, when you go to work for somebody, they say, here's your desk and here's where you're going to sit. And it was a little bit of a shock to us to have no furniture.
So to that point, I do have kind of a follow-up question. Um, Nowadays, you can start an online business, right? And nowadays, there's the costs or the barriers to entries are so much lower than they used to be. And so, maybe this transitions a little bit into kind of some of your work as a VC now. Is money absolutely necessary to start a business? Or for
Well,
most businesses, I should say.
boy, that's a fantastic question as well. The majority of businesses uh, don't require outside investment. The vast majority. Uh, the all businesses require money. This is actually one of the best lessons that everybody needs to learn. Is it does take money to make money, but not necessarily. You don't necessarily make more money when you have more money. It is possible to overfund an enterprise, and that's not very good. The best guidance that you can give to entrepreneurs is figure out how much money you actually need and get only that amount with a little bit of a buffer. If you take too much money too quickly, it will really screw up your business. It's not a good thing to have more money than you need. Uh, but many businesses, like my friend who I mentioned earlier, who runs the headhunting business, that's largely an online business. So he has an office because he doesn't like to work from home. He wants to separate his home life from his work life. The office is a block away from where he lives, but he walks over to his office, he logs in, and his staff is spread all over the world. He has uh, uh, his main assistant is in Serbia, and he interacts with her in the mornings, and then he interacts with customers in the afternoons in the West Coast. But it's his startup cost. I mean, a computer, a bank account. You need to have a corporation to protect yourself as an individual. So I wouldn't recommend that anybody does a sole proprietorship or a classic partnership in this day and age. Always set up a corporation so that you have a corporate liability protection. Uh, and that's really all you need to do. If you have a bank account, you have customers that are willing to pay you money. If you can solve a problem that somebody has, you're literally in business. I mean, customer says, "I have a problem," and you say, "I can solve that problem, and here's how I can charge you to do that," and you're in business at that point. And many businesses don't require money. There are a lot of alternate sources of money too, other than expensive money. Bringing in an equity partner is generally pretty expensive in terms of when you think about the precious value of the shares of your company that you're giving up. There's a lot of great funding sources. Your customers will often give you advance payments. If you can solve a problem for them and relieve some pain, and you can say, "I need money up front," they will fund you. Your suppliers are often a great source of financing. If you have good relationship with your suppliers, and you say, "I need to get these raw materials so that I can build these into products for my customers. I've got orders from my customers, and if you give me this material, I'll show you what I'm going to do with it when I ship it to my customers, and they pay me, I will pay you immediately." There's a lot of suppliers that are willing to help you to get into business. There's other ways that you can set your business up. If you can find partners who have extra real estate, sometimes that's a great way to do to get a non-cash investment in your business. In the aerospace business, we needed to test all of our computer equipment for extended temperature, shock, and vibration. So we needed these big, expensive chambers that could do temperature cycling while doing shock and vibration at the same time. And we went to the bank and said, could we borrow money to buy these machines? We need to get these and bring them in and get them set up. And the bank actually said, "Well, yeah, we can do that, but it's going to be fairly expensive. Why don't you go to the suppliers of those machines and ask them if you can buy them on a lease to own basis?" which is dramatically less expensive in terms of interest. And we actually bought 4 of those big machines that way.
That's that's really smart, and I want to hone in on kind of you use this phrase, expensive money, and I think that that is a really interesting and wise way to think about funding or kind of having capital for your business. It's not just I think the first time we met, we talked about cash flow is king, right? Cash is the thing that'll kill your business faster than anything else. And thinking about your suppliers and saying, hey, can we do some type of kind of credit style? Hey, I'll pay you net 30 after you deliver the goods, and thinking about being able to get the materials and then also delivering to your customers in a unique way. That's actually really, really smart. And I think that often is lost as we read the news in the new age of VC, and oh my gosh, this company got $2 million of funding off of an idea on a napkin. Like, those kind of more alternative ways get lost in that.
Well, the more money you bring in to your company, the more money you're going to have to return to your investors. And if you're bringing in venture capital money, so the venture capital model, because of the risks associated with it, it's always a balance of risk and reward. And because the risks are so high, we know that a very large percentage of the companies that we invest in are going to fail. And it's very difficult to predict which ones are going to be the ones that succeed and which ones fail. So when we invest, we look for each investment that we make should have the capability of returning the entire fund, because you never know which companies are going to succeed. So to mitigate some of your risk and some of your exposure, you have to say, well, since I don't know which one's going to succeed, I better make sure the ones that do succeed are going to be able to pay back the fund. So you then look and say, which are the businesses that really are appealing to VC? And they're going to be the ones that focus on the largest markets. Like, one of the businesses I'm involved in is a alternative to dental insurance. And you say, well, okay, that's an interesting market, and dental insurance has some inefficiencies in it, and so it's ripe for disruption because 30 to 60 cents of every dollar gets consumed by the insurance, and it doesn't really make sense. But then you say, well, how big is this market worldwide? And in that particular case, then you say, well, who's a prospective customer? People with teeth. There's a lot of those. In fact, we just crossed 8 billion the other day on the planet. So there's more people with teeth than know how to use social media. So from one perspective, that market is potentially bigger than Facebook's, and Facebook's is pretty big. So you look at that and you say, that's a good candidate for venture because it's got this wild upside potential. My friend who runs the headhunting business, though, there's an awful lot of people that need jobs. In fact, a big chunk of those 8 billion are going to need jobs. But is it a reasonable market for him to say, well, if he's not specialized, is he going to be able to provide jobs for all those people? All of those people need dental care, but not all of those people need specific jobs. And his business used to be focused on inside sales. So, okay, what businesses are best served by inside sales? That's a smaller subset of the whole thing. Then ones that are telemarketing inside sales is even a smaller subset of that. But this was his specialty. So he's looking now for other specialties. But does a business like that ever have the potential to be a multi-billion-dollar business and be able to pay back a venture fund the kind of returns that it needs? And because of the risk return, the venture industry has been returning 30% over the last 50 years on average. That's remarkable. But to do that, you have to take these enormous risks. And so a smart investor, a truly intelligent investor, is going to say, well, I'm willing to take 3 to 10 or 12% of my assets under management and put those into this high risk asset class because I'm likely to get those returns. Historically, they've been there. But I can't afford to take that risk with my entire assets under management. So you diversify in the types of things that you invest in, and not every business is one that should be considered by venture. Entrepreneurs don't really know this, so all of them create a pitch deck and they say, "Well, I'm just going to get venture money," and they go out. This is one of the reasons that a typical VC will look at 1,000 deals, 1,000 pitch decks for every deal that they end up taking.
Hmm. Right, right. Because like you said, it's very expensive money, and because it's expensive, you have to return a lot of money, and there are but so many businesses that can start flipping that type of return within the time frame that it's expected. Right.
Now, there is another really important aspect, though, that you get when you engage somebody like a VC. A really great example of this is Microsoft in their early days. They were doing very well, and they had plenty of money. They didn't need money, but they wanted advice. They wanted to tap into this knowledge that people who shepherd new businesses into the marketplace can provide. So they did accept some venture capital money. And to this day, Bill Gates says that money that they took in, and I don't remember the exact number, it was a small percentage. It was like 5% of the company. I think it was a fair amount of money, though, at the time. He said that money is still in Microsoft's bank account. It's never been taken out and used. But they wanted to bring, and they needed to provide a stake to those VCs to get them interested in the business. But that's a big part of what happens in early stage, especially, is the experience that the venture capitalist, the portfolio manager, can bring to the portfolio companies. The experience, the helping them to avoid some mistakes, some bad judgments. This is really valuable. So even if you're not taking money, it is really advantageous to a small business to find a good group of advisors. And there's a lot of people in the world that are willing to be advisors. I would always recommend put an advisory board in place, even if it's relatively informal. Put some kind of incentive, give them some kind of stock options or some stock grants or some kind of equity so that they have a focused interest on helping you to succeed. They're naturally going to want to do that anyway, but they should get a benefit from it. And if all of those interests align, then you'd never face the classic agency problem where the manager has a motivation that maybe conflicts with the shareholder or the investor, and you want to try to eliminate that as much as possible. But advice is a big part of what VCs can bring to entrepreneurs.
No, that's really good advice. So one of the things that I on the topic of the VC world and kind of startups and kind of that ecosystem, there's always the question when you're fundraising about valuation, right? How much should I give up? How much is my company actually worth? And I want to kind of pick your brain because Polynomial, you've kind of cracked the code with this. And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of share your approach to kind of this very common problem, and because it is one of the differentiators between your firm.
Well, the first thing, the kind of one of the first challenges that you face with entrepreneurs is getting them to understand the subtleties of the percentages of ownerships of the company and the values of the company. And a lot of people don't have a really clear understanding of this until they study a little bit of finance. In my courses at DePaul, they're not math courses, but I do drag them through one equation, which is to show the time value of money, because they need to understand money invested now and money in the future all have different values, and they call it a discounted cash flow model of. So if you look at cash flows in the future, those are worth less than having the cash today. But anyway, simple math to study that. What you have to realize, though, is when you're selling a percentage of your company, you're not really giving up a share of your company. You're trading one asset, which is your ownership in your company, for another asset, which might be a commodity. It's just cash that you need to bring in, or something that you're going to be trading. A lot of times you'll give stock options to an employee because they can bring to you a skill set that maybe is too expensive for you to buy at this point. So you can trade this asset, which is stock that'll have a value in the future. So you have to start thinking of stock not as percentages of your company. You have to think of them as an asset that can be traded for whatever other assets you need at that particular point in time, whether it's skill or cash or components or materials or real estate or whatever you need. So when it comes to valuation, you have certainly your future cash flows are a value. The assets that you've accumulated, the plant and equipment, the intangibles, intellectual property, patents, these sort of things. All of these are valuable. They all need to be taken into account with evaluation. And then you're going to trade those assets for the ones that you need. If you need cash to go buy materials, you may have to give up a percentage of your future cash flows. And so you have to think of these things all in terms of assets. Ultimately, again, my father was in the car business, and almost everybody has some kind of a relationship with a car. Not too many people don't have them. Everywhere we would go, people would say, "Hey, I got this car. What is this car worth?" And my father would say, "It's worth what you can get somebody to buy it for." They expected him to say, "Oh, it's a such and such year model with this feature and that feature, and here's what its blue book value would be at this point." No, an asset is worth what somebody is willing to pay you for it. And this is one of the things that we focused on. So let me tell a little bit of an extended story. This is a long podcast, so you can work with this one.
Sure.
So when I was managing this company, Right Hand Technologies, building these aerospace computers, I watched a remarkable series of mergers and acquisitions in that space. Even in our customer base, there were these remarkable ones. So we had this company, MTech, based in Milwaukee. They were about $100 million company, and they generated $15 million in profit every year. So about 15% EBITDA. And they were sold to another one of our customers, BE Aerospace, which is the largest manufacturer of airplane seats for commercial aviation. They're based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And they were sold for roughly 23 or 24 times their EBITDA. Well, when you think of what businesses sell for, traditional small businesses sell for 2 or 3 or 4 times their EBITDA. EBITDA, by the way, is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's really the free cash flow that a company generates. And that is largely a big factor of the value of a company is its ability to generate cash flow going forward. If you think of putting your money in a bank account, that bank account has value because it gives you interest in the future. It keeps your money safe, and it gives you a return on that investment. When you invest your money in a company, you get this free cash flow out in the future. So you now have this cash flow, and these multiples in the aerospace industry were just remarkable. Then, so I started with MTech, was purchased by BE Aerospace. Well, BE Aerospace was bought by our largest customer, was Rockwell Collins, again at a multiple up in the 20s of their earnings. So a multiple of 20 of your earnings. I mean, think about that. If you invest $10 in something, or if something is going to return you $10 a year, you've got to pay $200 to buy that thing. Well, that's only going to give you a 5% return going forward. But in this industry, there were these remarkable. The biggest one was Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, traditionally value-focused investor. They bought a company called Precision Cast Parts, which makes the aluminum castings that hold landing gear under commercial aircraft. The wheel assemblies that they land on. When you see the 747 come in and all those wheels hit the pavement, that aluminum thing, they're the only company that makes it. They're a big company. They generate $10 billion in recurring revenue and about 1.5 in recurring profit. And Warren Buffett bought that company for $37 billion in cash. 37 billion, just an enormous return. And then we watched our customer BE Aerospace was then bought by our largest customer Rockwell Collins. Again, huge. Then Rockwell Collins was purchased by United Technologies at again a 20 multiple. And so I said, this is the time for me to go sell my little right hand technology. So we hired an investment banker and we brought him in and we said, we've got this great company. We work in this really, difficult to achieve agency approvals for aerospace. We have the best companies in the world, best customers in the world. We have Boeing and the Navy, and these are the type of customers. They always pay their bills. What kind of a multiple can we get looking at what Berkshire Hathaway has paid and what Rockwell and United Technologies and all these others? And they said, you're a small manufacturing company. You can have like a 4 multiple or so. And I said, well, 4? No, this is aerospace, difficult to achieve agency approvals, best customers in the world. They said, okay, 6. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, because you're very small. And I said, these big companies command these big multiples. And that just didn't make sense to me. I said, why is it that a small company, if I put $1 in a bank account, I'm going to get the same return as if I put $10 in the bank account or $100. Now, there does come a point where I can go to that bank and they'll say, well, the threshold for this CD is maybe 10,000 and you can maybe get 3.5% now if you. So there is some point to a bigger investment is more valuable because it can give a bigger return. But this was sort of irrational. And so I went off on a mission to try to find why this is. And I had to go back to school to do it. And I had to study finance up to the eyebrows and go as deep as I could. I actually took 7 finance courses, graduate level finance courses, to figure this out. And where I think I found my answer was in financial statement analysis. And the project they gave us to do in this course was take the public statements from public companies, take their financial statements, and then from just those financial statements, create an algorithm that would recreate the credit ratings of Fitch, S&P, and Moody's. And of course, our first try, we were nowhere close. Then they taught us, you look at this way, and then you can compute this ratio and this ratio and that ratio and this ratio. And I said, there's something to these ratios. For one thing, they're mathematical. And as a math major, I love everything mathematical. What we learned, though, is that accountants have created as many as 50 of these ratios. And what is a ratio other than a numerator over a denominator? Well, if the numerator is made up of multiple terms and the denominator is made up of multiple terms, and some of those are common terms, through the magic of algebra, we can cancel things on the top and the bottom of these equations, and we can reveal now numbers and data that is maybe not readily available in those financial statements. And when you do this, and from a venture capital perspective, so you can do this for any publicly traded company. If you're in the aerospace, go get Boeing and Airbus and Northrop Grumman and take their financial statements, do this analysis of them, and you'll find out what parameters mean and what their efficiencies of sales conversions and their cost of customer acquisition. And all of these things can be unearthed by doing this mathematical analysis. Well, then you can do exactly that same thing for your portfolio companies. When you do that, you find these differences. They are illuminated with a blowtorch, as one of my bosses used to say. Let's find that, illuminate it with a blowtorch. When you do this, now you can see these deficiencies. And the root cause of this, and it's small companies are started by entrepreneurs. They develop. Big companies are just long established, and they build these mature operational methods and procedures and ways of working that just become part of the culture of the company over time. And it works, and it creates the kind of momentum and longevity that they could lose 5 or 10% of their staff at any time, and the company would just keep going. If that happens to a small entrepreneurial firm, it may die.
Right.
What you find, though, when you really look at these and you sort of peel this onion back, those big companies have all kinds of infrastructure for pretty much every situation that can come up. When you look at the small company, small companies are entrepreneurs fall into two classes. They fall into way more than two, but for the purposes of this illustration, two classes of what I call geniuses: the technical genius or the sales genius. So the technical genius says, I've got a great idea. I've got a new product or service that's going to change the world. I want to go build a company out of it. So they go and they build that thing. And then they know that they have to sell it to somebody. They need a customer. So now they're focused on the product and the customer. And this is a really good thing to focus on. They don't worry so much about accounting systems. They don't worry about HR at this point, and they shouldn't. And they don't worry about inventory management and quality control, because those things can all be fixed at some point in the future. But if you don't focus on those as your company starts to grow, those areas end up underfunded and underdeveloped. So now when you do this analysis that I talked about, you take these public statements, you unearth these, you surface these pieces of data that are not readily available in the financial statements, but can be arrived at through analysis and algebraic disaggregation of these ratios. Now you start to see that, oh, the small company does not have quality control. Well, that's $1 million investment. So that's $1 million of your valuation that doesn't exist. You don't have an HR department. Right. There's a good chance, if you haven't had an HR department or you haven't been working with a consultant, that you've made some mistakes that to your acquirer could be a liability. Finance and accounting. So many small companies proudly announce, we use QuickBooks. What the acquirer hears is, we use spreadsheets. And we know spreadsheets are not scalable, and QuickBooks is a wonderful thing to get started with a small business, but it does not scale. If you try to run, when we tried to use QuickBooks for our aerospace computer manufacturing business, we needed to provide traceability for every single resistor and capacitor that we bought. And the inventory management system of QuickBooks just simply couldn't be configured to do that. We created our own system to do it, and then mated it with QuickBooks. So what we realized then is that if you do this analysis for your prospective acquirer or for your industry average, and then you do it for your portfolio company, you can now start to see these differences. And if you take each one of these terms, a numerator and denominator, put a coefficient in front of it, it starts to look like a big polynomial. So you can, on one side of it, you can put your prospective acquirer or your industry average. On the other side, you can put your portfolio company. You have this big polynomial. Now it's a math problem you can solve. And you can use this to highlight these deficiencies. So the one half is the technical genius who says, I got a new product and service. I can change the world. I'm going to build a company, but it's really important that I focus on customers. So now you've got the product and the customer that you're focused on. The other genius is the sales genius. And they say, give me a great idea and I can sell it to anybody. So they focus completely on the customer. And then they know they need something to sell to the customer, so they focus on the product and the service. So either path that you take, your small entrepreneurial company is focused on the customer and the product that you sell to the customer. And those are the two things. And all those other things, those other areas, quality control, finance and accounting, operational methods, program management, predictability of development schedules. You'll notice that even some large companies, Tesla, can't seem to predict their schedules reliably at all. They need to probably put some effort into their program management process. So setting expectations, realizing those expectations, and then being able to accurately predict the schedule that you're going to need to do that. So when you look at these deficiencies, then the small company is focused on the product and the customers. They're not worried about HR. They're not worried about quality yet. They're not worried about operational methods yet. Those all become devaluations of the small company. So from a VC perspective, what we're trying to innovate here at Polynomial Ventures, and we call that system, by the way, the venture polynomial. So it's a play on words that I just love math words. So what we try to do is say, let's take an industry average if we want to do an IPO, or take some prospective acquirers. If we're in aerospace, Boeing is a good prospective acquirer. Let's take their financial statements, analyze them, generate these ratios, do exactly the same thing for our portfolio company, find the deficiencies, because they're easy to find at that point. They're illuminated with a blowtorch. And then set objectives for our portfolio company managers to bring their measurements into conversion to converge with the prospective acquirer. So now if you work on this for several years and you take every one of your measures and you bring it into convergence with your prospective acquirer, now you go and approach them and say, you should buy our company. We can add this differentiated value and this new product and this new service, and your market will benefit from this. And they say, okay, but when we buy a small company, it has all kinds of deficiencies. And we say, yes, they typically do, but we anticipated that, and we set some objectives for our portfolio company manager a few years ago to bring their numbers into conversion, to converge with yours. And what we now have is a set of equations that we can prove to you that if you take this particular portfolio company and you merge it into your company, every single measure is going to be accretive. So it is going to increase the value of your company. And this then is the best way to defend the valuation of your portfolio company, because you can say, it is worth this much, and let me show you why when you pay that much and you bolt it onto your company, your value increases because it's accretive in every single measure, or improves you in every single measure, and gives you access to new technology that might cost you much more to develop internally. So that's how we proceed with this valuation. But all of these transactions are just fundamentally based on that valuation, and everyone who starts a company needs to constantly be concerned about the valuation. And how do you assess this? I teach this in my course. In all of them, I have 4 courses that I teach, and in every one of them I make mention of this, that your valuation, a big portion of it is the future cash flows that your business is going to generate. However much revenue you're projecting, you have your top line revenue, you have your cost of goods sold, you have your expenses, and then you have your bottom line. And that bottom line is the cash that you're generating from the operation of your business. That's going to be a big chunk of your valuation. Another big chunk of it is going to be the assets that you accumulate, the plant and equipment, the real estate, the intellectual property, the patents, the way of doing business, the procedures, and the people. The people are critically important, and the definition of those functions that the people are going to form, because sometimes you can't keep all the people, but you can keep those functions. You can get the best available people in each one at the time. So you have all of these valuation components. The way that you can constantly keep an eye on those and awareness of them is to have your income statement, to be looking at that, how much goes in the top from the customers, how much comes out the bottom for the shareholders, how much is available for the employees in between for expenses and for cost of goods, and your balance sheet. Very simply, what assets have you accumulated? What liabilities do you have? What is the equity that's left in the business? And this is the basis for which all transactions are going to be performed.
I appreciate the thought and the analysis that you've kind of gone through to simplify that. And when you explain it, it makes perfect sense. The other piece that I appreciate, especially what you just said at the end, for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs that don't have a finance background, or, struggle to figure out what some of these things are, it's very, at the core of it, understand your income statement and understand your balance sheet. Those are the 2 things you need. And I know many people that want to get into business, and they get very overwhelmed by all of the finance things and the jargon, the terms and the ratios. And my mom, who's an accounting professor, she's always said, accounting is just debits and credits. Understand your income statement, understand your balance sheet, and everything else is fine. And you're right. That's exactly what you just said. all of the other pieces, if your business is growing to the point that you're in a position for a transaction, um, people that know those numbers much better than you will be involved.
Well, that expertise is readily available. There's a lot of ways that you can hire an accountant to help you to understand your balance sheet and your income statement, and that's really, every business, there's a really significant possibility that you're going to generate a profit. And if you do, you're going to have to pay taxes. And if you're going to be paying taxes, you have to be analyzing your income statement and your balance sheet. And you don't have to have this expertise yourself, but you do have to know how to get it, because otherwise you're going to risk tax evasion. So there's a lot of ways to hire accountants, and there's a lot of ways to look after those numbers, but so you need to do it for paying your taxes. But you also, I would make the statement that you need to do it. It is the way to manage your business. And I didn't study business as an undergrad. I studied math, and I thought I would end up going into like I said, rocket science or business management. But only when I went back to school, then it became clear to me how simple and how important these fundamentals are. So when I teach this one course, it's a 200 level course, and it's starting a business. And what I have them do in the course, I have the students do, is first thing is go to the SBA, to the Small Business Administration website, and download. They have a template for a business plan, just a generic business plan. It's the ABC Consulting Business. And so it's a short, it's about a 5-page, and each page is only a short paragraph for this business plan. And then I created just a very, very simple 4-line income statement. So it's just revenues at the top, cost of goods sold, expenses, and bottom line EBITDA. And then a very, very simple, it's about a 3 or 4 or 5-line balance sheet, which says, here's your assets, here's your liabilities, and here's your shareholder equity. And I give them those 3 documents and say, here's everything that you need. And then the ideas that my students have for businesses are just fantastic. One of the last semester, one of them had they were going to do dog sitting, and the name of the company was Barkingham Palace, and they had a little dog with a British collar on. And fantastic marketing. But whether it's that business, another one of my students last semester had they worked in the injection molding tool making business. So to do injection molding, any plastic parts like the shell for your computer, if it's plastic, they have these big presses. They used to have a little version of these at museums. You would go in and you would get a wax dinosaur at the Museum of Science or at the Field Museum. So it's this big press, this metal thing that comes together. They inject the plastic, it opens up, and the little part pops out. So this guy was developing a startup business to create those molds using a 3D printing process. And he was able to use exactly the same 3 documents, the income statement, the balance sheet, and the simple business plan, as the woman who made the Barkingham Palace. And there's a few other interesting tools that get into the meat of the course. Alexander Ostenwalder created this thing called the business model canvas. He's got a 9-box single sheet where in the center you have your value proposition, and then you have all of these other things that feed into that. It's a great reference. It's a great book, actually. I can't think of the title of it, but Alexander Ostenwalder, Business Model Canvas is the tool, and I teach that to every one of my students.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So speaking of your teaching experience, one of the things that I wrote down that I wanted to ask is, what topic or lesson that you give most excites you when you sit in front of your students?
the one that I have the most passion about. So obviously, I have passion about these three simple documents, and it is elating to me to see people embrace those three documents. Because if you take your business and say, I got a business plan, I got a financial set of projections, and that's how I look at my business, then I know they're looking at the same way everybody else looks at it. So that is great. The
Mhm.
the thing that I learned early in my career that I have used every day since then, and also in parenting. I have four children, four wonderful children. I've been married for 38 years, and we put a lot of effort into raising these children. And we have one grandchild now. We have an almost 2-year-old grandchild. So we've always found a way to
Congrats.
have time to spend with these with our kids, and to participate in their events, to just always be there while working tough schedules. There's some very simple skills that fall into the category of interpersonal skills management, and it has to do with and it applies not only to business but to life. But in business, it particularly applies. And I have used these four simple things pretty much every day since I started working, 30 some years ago. And and one is constructive criticism, or complimenting. First is complimenting. So how do you compliment somebody's good work? When somebody does something for the organization or for the family or for the situation, and it makes a contribution, how do you call that out and recognize it? Well, there's a process, and I teach it in the course. There's four things that you do. Uh, and then very similar to that is constructive criticism, where you say, so in the first one where you're complimenting, they took an action and it really helped the organization or the family or the situation. Now, in the second one, they take an action and it maybe doesn't quite contribute the way they wanted it to. They always had a good intention, but they needed to. They took the action. They had a good motivation, a good intention to do it. They took the action, and it didn't work out so well. So now you have to do constructive criticism. So you say, okay, I understand what you were trying to accomplish. I understand exactly the action that you took. Understand this consequence, that what happened as a result of your action actually hurt us a little bit. And so we want to make a modification to that. Now we've made that modification. I'm going to recommend this change. Does that still allow you to achieve the positive, noble objective that you were trying to make when you took the action in the first place? So complimenting,
Right.
constructive criticism. There comes a point where you now where those two no longer apply, and you're working with somebody to develop a new process or a new procedure or a better way to do something, and you end up with a situation where you can't come to agreement, where you say, we need to do this, but we can't do it this way because it's just not working. Alter the constraints. You just alter the constraints and say, well,
Hmm.
what if we didn't have these constraints? Then what could we do? I think Elon Musk is probably the best guy in the world
Right.
at this. He's saying, well, what if we just say it's difficult to go to Mars, but let's just do it anyway? We're going to figure out a way to overcome that. And so you've got now complimenting, criticizing, constructive criticism, and then altering the constraints. And even after all that, you may get to a point where you have to manage differences. Well, that's where you say we're going to agree to disagree, but somebody is in charge and somebody gets to make the decision, and you can do it in such a way that you have that person still committed to the organization, that they understand why you have to make this decision and force them to do something they don't want to do. So the final course in my series. So the first one is creative thinking. How do you come up with a great idea? The second one is forming the business, and that's where you set up these documents and you understand the structure of what is
Mhm.
a partnership versus a proprietorship versus a S corp versus a C corp. Then the next one is, now you've got your business, you've established it, and you need to grow. So how do you finance it? So how do you go and raise money for it? And then the final one is, now you've raised the money and you're going to grow your business. How do you put this management infrastructure in place? And that those four interpersonal skills, that is kind of the culmination, because once you've done all that other stuff, you've got the great idea, you put your business in place, you financed it, and now you're trying to manage it. You're trying to get people to all move and pull in the same direction and make it happen. That to me is the thing I'm most passionate about, because uh, I've spent my life trying to manage engineers, which is a really interesting task. To understand this
Mhm.
fully, all you have to do is read the Dilbert comic strip, and you'll understand how engineers differ
Yes.
from regular people.
Yes. Yes. I used to use the cartoon when it says what the salesperson sold, what the engineer built, what the project
Oh
manager
yeah, that's
expected,
what the
what
two
marketing
trees
promoted.
and the tree swing. With the trees are
Yes.
sawed, and there's a gap where the swing can move back and forth. And the yeah,
Oh, I love that. I love that cartoon. Hey, so you've got me thinking with what you just said, because I think it does apply to life and also applies to business. And just in my experience, I feel like my career did a really good job of teaching me that last part, that kind of interpersonal, how to manage, how to collaborate, how to kind of pull a team together, how to, constructively criticize but still empower people. So it's interesting kind of spending, a decade in industry and now trying to go entrepreneurial. Okay, I've got the idea, I formed the business, and now it's kind of that in between that I feel like I need to catch up. I need to catch up on the building the business, growing the business, sales, growth, marketing, all of those things. So it is also a very interesting way, the way you framed it, that I'm thinking about where I need to develop to kind of get my own business going.
well, first of all, Boyega, you have an excellent personality. You've learned so much through your career. You know, working in the banking industry and the regulation, and then consulting, and now what you're doing now. So you've got just a tremendous talent stack that is going to serve you very, very well. And if you look at your business the same way that I'm describing here, so you say, what is the business? It's a great product or service that's going to change the world. It's going to have value for people, and when you generate that value, you can bring revenues in your top line, and then you've got your cost of goods sold, and you can take steps to make sure your business is profitable. So write a good plan, understand what it is that you're delivering, what it is that is going to make your business strong and survive and be important. How are you going to manage it to generate your income? Once you've generated your income, that's going to
Mm-hmm.
be your future cash flows, and that's going to drive to a large degree the value of your business. And so you've got three simple documents that can encompass, that you can use every single day to solve the 1,000 problems that you're going to need to solve. And then when you solve those, use those interpersonal skills techniques, which I'm sure that you have a really good handle on anyway.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, you're right. It's especially now that it's coming to the end of the year. Again, my mom's my accountant, and we were talking last week. And said, "Oh, we got to start producing the income statement. We've got to start producing all of those things." So I'm glad this is a perfect time to start doing that and kind of reevaluating as we plan for 2023. So
Yeah.
so
As long
so
as you're done by March
you're
15th, you'll be
you're you're
fine.
definitely right. Right. Exactly.
Unless it's a COVID year,
Exactly.
then maybe they
Um.
have an extension.
Yes. All right, I've got so many. I could talk to you all day. One question that I want to get in before we get to the kind of quick hitters and closeout questions is, throughout your career, what is something that you wish you knew before you started?
That's a great question, Boyega. So I really, truly don't think that way. The worst boss I ever had, he used to wait for someone to express regret for some missed opportunity. And then he would just say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Didn't, did you? So what did that accomplish? You always wish you knew something that you didn't think of before, but not knowing things leads you to make mistakes, and mistakes are necessary for learning. Without mistakes, learning might even be impossible, but it's certainly much more difficult. So I want to make those mistakes. I want to find the solutions. I want to improve the process and the procedures. I'm a big fan of structured organizational methods, operational methods, I call them. Uh, I implement them even in the smallest companies. The most important feature of the best systems is the one that is self-improving. And I have a good
Mm,
anecdote that I want to share here. When I was managing the aerospace company, we wanted we're Chicago based, and so we wanted desperately for Boeing to be a customer. So we went out and I got our sales guy to call on Boeing, and he took me in there, and I went in and I said, "Oh, this is fantastic. We're in talking to Boeing, the most, and this was before the 737 Max debacle, but still one of the most respected
mm,
companies in the world, and we're in our industry and in our hometown, and we got in there, and Boeing said, you know, we like small companies, but it's really difficult for us to engage with them because your likelihood of making mistakes is just simply too high. You, as a small company, don't have the mature processes and procedures that we really want to see that are going to prevent mistakes. Um, so I took that to heart, and I went back and I said, well, what do they really mean? And so first, everybody knows about ISO 9001. This is a set of standards for manufacturers mostly, but any company can be ISO certified, ISO 9001, but particularly important for manufacturers. So I went back and said, okay, let's do that. And then as we were going through that process and we were building these procedures and writing them, I learned of the aerospace extensions to ISO 9001. And this
mm,
is embodied in a document called the AS 9100. And I found out that it was
mm.
written largely by Boeing. So I went and I acquired that document. And then I said, okay, what does it take to change our certification, to upgrade our certification from ISO 9001, which is the standard manufacturer certification, to the aerospace extensions? Well, what it took to do that, we hired a consultant and we set out to do that. And we had to literally write about 400 pages of procedures, policies, exceptions, contingencies, self improving mechanisms built into the system so that when a problem would occur, you immediately trip into this five why. So you say why 5 times. By the time you do that, you're down to the root cause of the problem. Now you found the problem. How does the process improve itself so that you don't have this going forward? And all of this is gets back to that original question, which is, what do you wish you knew that you would do differently? And and I really view that as irrelevant. You want to make the mistake, and you
Mm.
want to have the procedure so that you learn from the mistake corporately. As an organization, you learn from the mistake, you modify your processes, then you retrain everybody to use this. A really good example of this in action was we were building these bulkhead video displays that go into business jets, and to take a piece of consumer technology like an LCD panel that you would buy at Best Buy for $200 and bolt that into your aircraft, you can't just do that. You have to disassemble it, get down to the raw panel. Then you've got to test it for extended temperature, shock and vibration, radio emissions. It has to meet standards that are not the FCC standards. These are the FAA, much more difficult standards. So we needed to enclose these things in aluminum enclosure. So we built these aluminum enclosures, and then we had 31 or 32 screws that had to go into this thing. Well, how tight do you tighten the screws? So you now have to go to the engineering level and you say, okay, well, the screw is going to go into a drilled hole in aluminum that is tapped with threading, and the screw is going to be a stainless steel screw. So first you're going to put some thread lock on there to solve the vibration problem. Now you're going to put this thing together, and you got to take a screwdriver and you turn this screw. Well, you might turn the screw a little different with a slightly different force than I would turn it. So
Yep.
how tight does that need to be? So now you need a torque wrench, your screwdriver with a gauge on it that you can screw this thing down, and it's going to snap when it gets to, not snap the screw, but snap through its resistance, its rating, its
Right.
level. So you tighten the thing down until you get to exactly the right number of Newton meters of force, so that you've tightened it to the engineer's specification for what that should be. Now, how do you know that that torque wrench you're using is actually tightening it to the torque that you specified? Well, you've got to calibrate that tool. Well, then you buy a tool
Mm-hmm.
that does that calibration. How do you know the tool that's measuring the calibration is good? Because it goes to a certification agency, which goes through a similar process. So every year we have to take our calibrators out and get those calibrated so that we can check our tools to make sure that we're tightening to exactly the right thing. And when you find, and we actually had this happen, we had one where even after you've done all of that, now the assembler gets distracted when they're putting the unit together and they forget to put one of the screws in. So now that the system doesn't work, so we ship that to the customer inspects it, and they find the screw missing. So now they come back to us and they say, you shipped us a thing with a screw loose, missing. No, screw loose is, that's, some people have described me. So then we said, that's a pretty big flaw in our process. Now we've got all of this stuff in the process. You've got to use this particular type of screw. You've got to put the thread lock compound on it. You have to tighten it with the torque wrench. You have to do all this. But how did one slip through where the screw wasn't in there? Well, the inspector, we said the way to handle that is when our inspector looks at that product to inspect the quality before they ship it, they have to take their finger and touch each screw and count them out loud to make sure that all the screws are in there. So that's an improvement to the procedure that you've created. You then update the documents. You go through a release process to make sure that every stakeholder is satisfied with the change, and then you roll that out into the factory, and you end up with a great process that is self-improving. When it finds a problem, it stops. You read through the procedures. How do I fix this? You change the documentation. You re-release it, and you end up with a great process that self-corrects.
So you're going to hear a little bit of the nerd in me. That process is fascinating to me, and it's fascinating because I have this habit of whenever I see something or I want to do something, I I look to, okay, who does this specific thing the best? And let me just kind of watch and read and like break it down to the core principles, and then I can apply it to like my much far less important thing, right? And as I kind of hear you talk about kind of the building kind of these technologies, these tools for airplanes and aircrafts, and you go through, okay, well, how do you make sure that this person doesn't squeeze the screwdriver to their might versus another person? And you start breaking down, and I love what you said, like the 5 whys. Why did this happen? Okay, why did that happen? Why did that happen? I'm analyzing this as, oh, that's how you can have like a thorough training process. That's how you can have a thorough risk mitigation strategy. That's how you can make sure that you have this consistent level of quality. And yes, not every business is building planes or components for planes, but those principles of self-improvement, but then building a process that also catches things and raises its hand and say, hey, you need to come figure something new out. I'm going to apply that to my business today.
Yeah.
And yes, there's some level of rigor that, certain businesses don't need to apply, but it's that mindset and thinking through, I think another way of saying is, how do you explain it to a 5-year-old? Because they're going to say, okay, well, why do I need to do this? And then what about this? And what about that? I'm nerding out just off of okay, you have to touch each thing. Like even that, I'm like, yeah, that'll work. That'll solve the problem.
Yeah, because that's exactly what you do is you say, okay, a problem occurred. Let's do whatever we need to analyze it down to the root cause, to get to the point where we really truly understand the failure mode and what caused it. And then what can we do to mitigate that, to correct it so that it never will happen again? And That's why I do like that question, is what would you do differently? And I'd say, I don't know that I do a lot differently. You always in life, not just in business and engineering, but in life, you look back and you say, what would I have done differently? And there's things that you did that you're maybe not so proud of, that didn't work out so well, that created pain and misery for yourself and others. But if you did those differently, uh, at the point that you do something that is bad, and you try to cut a
Right.
corner, okay, that you don't want to cut corners, and so what would do differently is to say, I wouldn't have cut that corner. But at the point that you make an honest mistake, when you take the engineering, and I've worked with so many engineers. I admire them at a level that I can't even describe, because they do try to think so many steps ahead, and how can you prevent bad things from happening. But anything that you go at and you do that and you try to think through, what are the consequences of these actions that I'm going to take? What is the likelihood that it's going to work out well? And what are the risks that I have to take? And I know I have to take risks from time to time, but what are the things that I can do to try to really get the best possible outcome? And then when I don't get that, analyze exactly why and fix the process. Well, the world becomes a better place. That it's not just a matter of building a better widget that has all the screws in the right place. It's a matter of
Yeah.
everyone who touches that process is a little bit smarter as a result. And the next thing that they create, they're going to have a little bit more information, and so there's no way to know all the answers, and the way you learn them is by making the mistakes. So I don't, I guess the only things that I would try to avoid is at the point that you knowingly take a shortcut and you're not sure of what the consequences. There are times when it's appropriate to say, to do this exactly the way it should be done is not practical, and so I've got to take some element of
Mm-hmm.
risk. Uh, if I need to, I'm trying to think of a great example here where where risk is just, well. Here is a great example. Let's get back to venture capital. So it is
Mm-hmm.
impossible to know, when you engage with a founder who has a great idea, who wants to change the world, who's got identified a large market. Uh, it's impossible to know what are going to be the obstacles for that company. What are the things that are going to keep them from succeeding? And the more times that you can go through that and find the problems and resolve them, the better equipped you're going to be in the future. And if you don't go through that process, you don't get the learning. This is, I think, the fundamental of our education system is they put they create a scenario where it's reasonably safe, because each time you answer a question, you have a chance of getting it wrong. If you get enough of them wrong, you're going to get a bad grade. And if you get big grades that are too bad, you're not going to graduate. But still, it's an environment where nobody's going to really be injured physically, and nobody's really going to die as a
Right.
result of that. So you want to create those scenarios where it's okay to make some mistakes, as long as you learn from them, and you make the process better,
Yeah.
and then the process collectively adds up to be the entire world, and then the world's a better place.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. I used to do this thing in consulting when I would kind of manage a team, especially new associates straight out of college. I would kind of look at the project and I'd say, okay, how can I create a bubble where they can screw things up and it doesn't catastrophically impact the project? Okay, perfect. So I'd figure this thing out, and then I'd say, okay, um, Jim, your job is to get this deliverable done. This is an example of how it's been done before, but I want you to screw things up. I was like, your job is to tell me next week what you learned about what you did wrong. Perfect. Go. And so I knew like if they screw this thing up, I already put enough padding in a project plan, or I made it so it wouldn't have any external impacts. But what I loved about it was after the project, they would say, these are the three things I learned. And then they would like, I'm never messing that up on a project again. And they became better consultants. And that was just my engine. Whenever I got new associates, at one point, I think I had a project where I had like 4 or 5 new associates. And, most of my job as leader was like, okay, how do I create a space where all of them can screw up? And if they all screw up at the same time, it doesn't screw us over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was fun for me.
And
Like
there's a
that was like a
trade-off.
really fun exercise.
Yeah, there's a trade-off with that, though. You
Yeah.
have to say, how much overhead can I absorb? How much learning can I put in?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm impressed. 5 associates at once. That would, in my world, that would be like 5 junior engineers all at once. And you really want to have a nice sort of a spread, a distribution of your workers,
Yeah.
where you've got a sufficient majority of really efficient, experienced ones, so that you can provide those experiences for the junior ones.
Yeah. No, that year, what these bags are from.
Yeah, we all develop scars.
Exactly. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of time. So I've got a couple concluding questions for you. First, with all of your experience and all of your time in the field, what are some books that you would recommend for new entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, when I went back to school a few years ago, I read more than 100 business books over that 2 years. Um, and what I really found inspiring, and I've been recommending these to a lot of young people lately and getting really good feedback from them. The classics. So Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. And by the way, if you read that book, you have to read it all the way through from the beginning, and then somewhere toward the middle, you strap your seatbelt on, because it's going to get crazy. And I had no idea how. I read that book when I was a kid, and it didn't register with me how insightful that is. Another classic is Ayn Rand, the Fountainhead. Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor. This is the book. He was Warren Buffett's mentor, and his book, even though it was written back in the 50s, it's still relevant today.
Yeah.
It's still relevant. I mean, the Intelligent Investor is just fantastic, and the number of young people that have come back to me after me recommending these, that have said, "Hey, that really had an impact on me." Another place that I find books that you wouldn't think of is I've kept all of my textbooks, even from college, and I occasionally find myself opening my differential equation book or my Tipler physics book. And one of my favorite ones is Principles of Corporate Finance, Brealey, Myers, and Allen. And all of these books are now old, and they're available in PDF for either a small fee or for free online. And there is just a wealth of wisdom in those books. Very recently, I read a great operational method book. It's called Traction by Gino Wickman, and he does a great job of explaining how he started. He took over his family business, and he grew it, and he sold it, and then he created another business, and it's a really good step-by-step guide for how to go through this entrepreneurial process and build a company that will scale and that will grow.
Awesome. All right. What question should I ask the next guest?
Well, how important are first impressions? And how do you think of those? That's this one I thought was particularly important because of the discussion that you and I had not too long ago about attire. So when I went to high school, at Brother Rice on the South Side, Brother Rice High School, we had every mirror at the top said "Look your best," and at the bottom said "To do your best." And we had to wear ties to school every day.
Mhm.
And so I got in the habit and said, I'm not uncomfortable. A lot of people say, "Oh, it hurts your neck, it's itchy." No, you just get used to it. You get a collar that fits properly, and you're fine. And you had mentioned that when you left the corporate world and moved into the entrepreneurial world, you said, "Oh, my new wardrobe is just hoodies," and and so this gets back to that first impression. So when you are wearing a hoodie, you make a different first impression than somebody who's wearing a suit and a tie, but it may be
Mhm.
the appropriate impression. So that's what I would like to hear
Yeah.
more about is how do people feel about these impressions? One of my partners in one of the businesses, my Zoom placeholder photo, I have a tie with a
Mhm.
pocket square, and it's a pretty formal picture. And every time we get on a call and I join the call, he's laughing. And I said, "What are you laughing about?" He goes, "Your picture. Don't you realize that, we're beyond the day where that doesn't matter anymore?" And I said, "Well, I'm old, give me that." Uh, and so it is, this is something that I'm really fascinated about is what is the first impression, and how important is it? It used to be the
Yeah.
saying was, you only have one chance to make a first impression, so you better make it good. Don't dress for the job that you're doing, dress for the job that you want. Make sure that you're one just noticeable
Mhm.
difference, dress better than anybody else that you're going to be meeting with, and that'll establish you as a superior, as confident and better prepared. So I'm not sure that I agree with all of that, but I can't help but have first impressions with everybody. So I would like to see a perspective of how people react, especially in this new day and age where we're doing business this way much more so than face to face.
Yeah, it's I think it's a great question, and I feel inclined because I want to answer it. But it's such a good question because I think first impressions are incredibly important. I always have. But your question of how often do you think about it? I think about it a lot. Like I think about first impressions so much, and like my choice to wear a hoodie on like work calls or whatever is very intentional because I'm analyzing it from the perspective of, okay, how do I how do I make sure that this person feels comfortable? How can I make sure that my personality shines through and they can be at ease? I go through that thought process. I just for Yentl, we're bringing on some interns, and so I interviewed an intern yesterday, and at one point he was like, "Man, I'm like super comfortable with you guys. Like I feel relieved." He was like, "I'm not gonna lie, I have a belt and slacks on right now." And I told him your exact quote because it was last night. I was like, there is some wisdom to always dressing one level above the audience. It's like, but understand, I appreciate the fact that you wore a button up. I'm personally wearing, a quarter zip or a hoodie just because I wanted to make you feel comfortable. Like
Ah,
that was part of my psychology of it. And so it is, I think in today's day and age, it is incredibly important to be very thoughtful and mindful of what the first impression is. And if you can manipulate it in the way that is appropriate.
yeah, so it's every bit as important as it's always been. It's just that um, maybe our psychology has advanced to the point where we really are thinking more about um, uh, or as much about the other person as we are about ourselves. And I really like your
Yeah.
thinking on this. You're saying I want to make that other person more comfortable. That is new learning for me because I hadn't really thought.
Yeah.
I guess I've thought of it in ways like one of the things that I'm really tall. We met in person, so you've seen this, and
Yeah.
I'm always concerned about intimidating because being loud and tall and
Yeah.
enthusiastic. And so I've learned when I'm meeting with people in person, I can sit lower in the chair and I can make myself a little bit smaller, and then it's not I may not be as intimidating to people. And I have asked people about that, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's true. That when you seem quite a bit smaller." It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because being relatively tall, when I meet people, I'm used to looking at them at a slight angle. When I meet somebody that I look eye
Yeah.
to eye to, I feel very small, and and I'm
Yeah.
unaware of my
Yeah.
size as well. So if I'm walking with a group of people and there's, say, a glass building with a mirrored facade, and I see this group of people walking with this big oaf lumbering along behind them, and I think, oh, that looks strange. Oh, wait a minute, that's me. So, so how we
Yeah.
perceive ourselves and how others perceive us is a really interesting psychology. And so I'm glad that you're focused on this, because I'm going to watch your I'm going to look for that in subsequent interviews.
I love it. Steve, this was an incredible conversation. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the insight, and excited to see what you do with Polynomial. And lastly, just let people know where to find you.
Polynomial Ventures in Chicago. We're online at Polynomial, POLYNOMIAL VC, like venturecapital.com. That's our website.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Visit BeHelpfulPodcast.com for more content, tools, and resources that'll help you along your entrepreneurial journey. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.